Good evening. I think we're going to start. I'd like to welcome you to the second in our series of 3 sessions of this conference on the origins of norms, which is jointly sponsored by the Philoctetes Center and the Heyman Center for the Humanities at Columbia University. I'd like to thank Francis Levy and Ed Nersessian, co-directors of the Philoctetes Center, and Akil Bilgrami, who is the director of the Heyman Center at Columbia, for making this conference possible. Also, before we begin, I'd like to mention that several of the books by the speakers at this conference are available at the back of the room, and I'm sure that they'd be very happy to sign anything you wish to purchase. Last night we had 2 extraordinary presentations by Dr. Gerald Edelman and Dr. Lorraine Daston. Dr. Edelman discussed his biological theory of consciousness and its grounding in evolution, and Dr. Daston addressed the notion of order and how we continually strive to make meaning out of nature rather than live with what she calls the horror of chaos. Tonight we have the honor of welcoming Anne Harrington and John Forrester. Dr. Harrington is professor of the history of science at Harvard University, specializing in the history of psychiatry, neuroscience, and the other mind sciences. She received her PhD in the history of science from Oxford University in 1985 and has held postdoctoral fellowships at the Wellcome Institute for the History of Medicine in London and the University of Freiburg in Germany. For 6 years, Dr. Harrington was co-director of the Harvard University Mind, Brain, Behavior Initiative and a member also for 6 years of the MacArthur Foundation Research Network on Mind-Body Interactions. In addition to writing more than 50 articles or book chapters on topics in her field, she has authored 3 books: Medicine, Mind, and the Double Brain, Re-Enchanted Science, and Stories Under the Skin, Mind-Body Medicine in America, and she has edited 6 others, including The Placebo Effect, an interdisciplinary exploration. From 2004 to 2005, Dr. Harrington was visiting professor at the London School of Economics, and in 2006, she was a part-time visiting professor at the Collège de France. Tonight she is going to speak to us on Buddhist brains, a case study in the re-enchantment of the brain sciences. Anne Harrington.
Thank you for that really very nice introduction and for the invitation, for the chance to get to know a little bit about what I beg your pardon. Can you hear me all right? This is going to have to be a little bit of a collaborative talk because my PowerPoint, my computer that's controlling the PowerPoint is over there with Ed, and I'm going to be giving him cues. But if you see me doing this, it isn't something strange. It's just trying to keep the thing going. So I'll be sort of. It's not Tourette's. It's just I want to start by evoking a sense of at least part of the historical agenda that I assume is hovering over the agenda of this meeting, which is the idea that actually the search for norms, the search for values in a world of nature is a fool's errand. Because by definition, the effects of naturalization, the effects of science is inherently disenchanting. Inherently drains the world of all value, of all meaning. It was, we all know, the disenchantment thesis goes back to the classic articulation of the disenchantment thesis goes back to the sociologist Max Weber, who I think is invoked on the website. So that I thought it would be perhaps an idea to start by reminding you what Max Weber had to say in his 1919 lecture to students at the University of Munich when he first articulated the disenchantment thesis in a lecture that was called Science as a Vocation. So let me just put a few of his words up there as a starting point then for moving on with the conversation. That's a cue. I knew this wouldn't be... No, don't push that button. Adam, we need you. Yes, see, it's not TV, but it's all right. There we go. Let's just... All right. Let me just, I don't normally like to read from PowerPoints, but this is quite an important quote, and I'm going to make a fair bit of it. So let me just read it out loud to you. He's saying at a key point, who, aside from certain big children who are indeed found in the natural sciences, still believes that the findings of astronomy, biology, physics, or chemistry could teach us anything about the meaning of the world. If there is any such meaning, along which road could one come upon its tracks? If these natural sciences lead to anything in this way, they are apt to make the belief that there is such a thing as the meaning of the universe down at its very roots. Tolstoy has given us the simplest answer with the words, science is meaningless because it gives us no answers to our question, the only question important to us, namely, what shall we do and how shall we live? That science does not give us an answer to this question is indisputable. Now, notice that Weber says here that the conclusion he's reached is indisputable. But then also notice that he also concedes, even if it's in the most disparaging and briefest of ways, that actually there are some people, these are the ones he calls the big children, even within the sciences, who are inclined to at least resist and potentially specifically challenge or dispute the disenchantment thesis. And one of these was, of course, Wolfgang Köhler, who was, nope, you moved, oh dear, you moved it back. There we go, that's fine. This is going to be fine. Who was the author of a book published in 1938 that almost certainly inspired at least the subtitle to this conference, The Place of Values in a World of Facts. Very similar, of course, not exactly, but really clearly in the same broad territory that we're in. Now, Wolfgang Köhler, some of you will remember or know about his work with apes on the island of Tenerife. But the more relevant piece of data here for you is just to recall that he was part of a group of psychologists, the Gestalt theorists, in Germany in the first decades of the 20th century, who were involved in reforming, revitalizing, redirecting the direction of the mind and brain sciences. And he was, from that base, one of those people who believed that the disenchanting message that people were hearing from the sciences in general, and perhaps from the mind and brain sciences of that time in particular, was wrong, was misplaced, was unnecessary. That there were new developments, new findings from the mind and brain sciences themselves, he said, that were showing that people's minds were not just machines passively getting inputs and spitting out outputs, that in fact minds engage actively in the world, and when they engage actively in the world, they have no choice but to perceive order, structure, and value everywhere they look. And you might think, Köhler said, that this is just an illusion that the mind imposes onto the world, but it isn't the case. Because then he goes on to say in this book, The Place of Value in a World of Facts, that new developments in physics, in biology, more broadly, show that higher order, that top-down ordering principles of structure actually prevail at every order of reality, in physics, in the life sciences. So when the mind sees this order, sees value, sees structure, is required to see order and structure, it's required to see it because they really, order and structure and value really exist. And this insight means that human beings no longer have to feel so disconnected from nature. The values that they cherish in their hearts really exist in the natural world. Now, it doesn't really matter if you didn't quite get all that, because I'm actually, he took 200 or 300 pages to go through all this, and I've just tried to sort of squeeze out a very sort of just an aura of what that argument is, because I'm not actually interested in the details of this argument. At least not for the purposes of this talk. It's actually an argument that very few people have. It didn't have much of an influence, to put it bluntly. Everyone remembers the title of this book. I'd be interested in a show of hands if anyone else besides me has ever tried to read this book. I thought you might have been. So we can actually. This is a very learned audience. Most people have. So, but even among you, there's only 2 or 3. What I'm actually, though, interested in, for the purposes of this talk, is the discipline that Köhler chooses as his opening wedge into the disenchantment debates. The fact that he chooses the mind and brain sciences. And the fact that for us today, living as we do in an age of genomics, of brain sciences, of pharmacology, that particular choice might feel particularly ironic. At least to the kinds of people I talk with a fair amount, it seems to them that it is actually in the brain sciences themselves, and I'm looking at Gerald Edelman because he may have things to say about this, that Weber's vision of disenchantment is being most vigorously realized, that the brain sciences are, in fact, a particularly disenchanting kind of discipline in our own time. Everywhere that the brain sciences turn their sights on, they flatten our subjectivity, they deprive us of our sense of moral agency. This is just the argument. This isn't me. He's disagreeing. No, it isn't. Bear with me here. They turn us into the sum of our molecular interactions or just the product of whatever can be seen on a brain scan. There's no place for values, the people I talk to a lot, in a brain scan. So let me just show that I'm not just sort of making this up. Let me quote you now words of a colleague of mine, the anthropologist Emily Martin. This is, thank you. She gave a presidential keynote address back to the American Ethnological Society back in 2000, and it was all about something she called neuroreductionism. And she went through the basic moves that I've just gone through, and then she concludes basically by admitting that she fears the worst. She says, neuroreductionism is on the rise. It's winning converts and influence at such a rate that people like her, anthropologists, other humanists, were left blinking, as she puts it. Next slide. Next slide. Or left blinking like deer in the headlights of a Mack truck. They realize the new neuroscience is eradicating everything that humanists hold dear to them, the social, the cultural, everything is being reduced to the brain. It's gaining recruits from sibling disciplines, and the whole thing is based on a caricature of the cultural. This is just her talking. Don't stop looking at me that way. Okay. So that's a kind of view, not mine as yet, but is this really all there is to say? In my own work, I'm not a brain scientist. I'm an historian of the mind and brain sciences. Some of my best friends are mind and brain scientists. And I've been inclined all along to resist this reflex tendency to assume that the neurological turn in our culture, if we agree that there is a neurological turn, that it can summarily be understood as resulting in a wholesale disenchantment of our humanness. I think when it comes time to write the history of this current era that we're living in, where the brain sciences are so prominent in our thinking, as an explanatory resource for us, what we will find is that, in fact, the brain sciences came to serve as arena not just for disenchanting reductionistic work, but also for projects that we might consider efforts at reenchantment, at value seeking. And I think that just as in Weber's time, there were people who resisted his dire message and tried projects like Püller that attempted to put forward a more positive message, so there will be people in our time who we will see who resisted the doomsaying conclusions of anthropologists like Emily Martin and attempted to present another point of view. Now, for my purpose, I'm not going to judge whether these alternatives to disenchantment are successful, but I want to at least call attention to the likelihood that we will find them, that they're there, and what that tells us about the moment that we're living in. And what I want to do now is give you a more concrete sense of what I'm talking about by telling you a little bit about just one of the efforts that I think we might decide was an important moment as we come to write in the future this history of the neurological turn in our society. And it's one that I've been tracking for a few years and have even been peripherally, personally involved with. The simple way to talk about this project is to say that it involves an effort to study the effects of meditation on the brain. But not just on any brains, on the brains of Tibetan monks who have advanced training in meditative practice. If I could have the next slide. That's the simple way to talk about this project. But my point, you won't be surprised, is going to be that there's really nothing simple about this project. And so I want to proceed with some remarks now, walk through some material now in several stages. I want to first tell you what these studies that look at the brain functioning, the effects of meditation on the brain functioning of monks, of Tibetan monks, what they actually say. I then want to make the case that we are dealing here not just with science, but as usual, but also with a cultural project, with a project in value seeking, in value making, a project in re-enchantment. After that, I want to briefly tell you something about how we got here. I just want to offer you a little bit of the unknown history behind the making of these studies, because it will help us. It will help us to better notice some of the less likely, some of the complexities and subtleties and instabilities in these projects that we might not otherwise be able to see. And then finally, I want to come back to the broader issue of re-enchantment projects in the brain sciences more generally, and see what we might want to say. So that's the game plan. And if I could have the next slide, I'll try not to talk too long as I make my way through it. So, what do the studies say? There have been, in the last several years, a series of publications, both in the peer-reviewed literature and then some in non-peer-reviewed spaces, in interviews and conference proceedings and so on, that have made a number of claims about how the brains of Tibetan monks who have engaged in anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 hours of meditative training, how they function. And these claims move in a kind of hierarchy of increasing remarkableness, if you can call it that way. The first claim that has been made is that the brains of these Tibetan monks are more emotionally stable, that they're less prone to startle responses. Their amygdalas are less trigger happy when a sudden loud noise, and they don't have the startle response is attenuated, and the amygdala is less activated than you would see in ordinary people. So they're more stable. The second claim is that they're happier. They know they're happier. What that means in brain science talk is the left prefrontal area of the brain, which these scientists claim is a brain signature of a certain kind of sense of well-being, or is more generally activated than in controls, than in ordinary people. The third claim, so they're more stable, they're happier. The third claim is that their consciousness is more synchronized. They synchronize different elements of experience more effectively than ordinary people, in the sense that studies show a striking synchrony in the electrical activation across different parts of the skull. And this is believed by these scientists to have functional significance. The fourth claim, and this is arguably the most interesting claim, is the claim that the brains of these monks are capable of compassion at a level unknown to anyone to those of us living in the West. When 9 monks were asked to engage in a particular meditation practice that was designed to cultivate compassion, researchers documented brainwave activities that was unlike anything, if I could just have the next slide, that had ever been seen in other healthy human subjects. These gamma waves, which I take it are indicative of intense alertness, 30 times as strong as that seen in a student control group. And you don't even have to know anything about the details to just know, look at that visual. That's the monks. These are the rest of us. And this is a quote from the report that appeared in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So this was in not in a kooky journal, in a serious journal. Now, this claim about compassionate brains actually begins to mix values and norms up with brain science in ways that we could probably talk interestingly about in this group. But you might say that that in itself doesn't make this an enchanted enterprise in the way that Weber might have recognized. That is to say, it doesn't make it an enterprise filled with a sense of implicit larger meaning and mystery. The concept of enchantment, it's in some ways a concept of disenchantment is the concept of a world bereft of gods, of a world bereft of color and light and magic, and this is the kind of what any project that you would want to call enchanted would have to, in some sense, reclaim that larger sensibility for us. What you could say about this, at least so far as what I've told you so far, is that actually these studies of Buddhist brains are evidence of Emily Martin's view that the brain sciences are everywhere. They've now got their hands on the monks, and they're turning them into brain scans, and it's just the same all over again. But obviously, I'm wanting to say that there's something different here, and now I want to try to make the case for what it is. If I could have the next slide. Now, certainly, it's true that we're seeing a lot of efforts in the neurosciences these days to claim aspects of human behavior for itself that had never previously been widely believed to be appropriate for neuroscientific investigation. People are studying religious experiences. People are studying morality, aesthetic reactions, economic decision-making. And these other projects are often associated with a certain amount of we're moving in, a certain amount of bravado. We can find the God spot in the brain. We can relate moral behaviors to prefrontal lobe functioning, Damasio's work. And I think this bravado, this sense of the consilience project, that we're going to come in and the humanists are going to be side on, and we come in and sort things out, is part of what worries people like Emily Martin. What I want to say is that the Buddhist Brains Project claims, perhaps, to be different from these other projects. That the Buddhist Brains Project is characterized not by a kind of bravado, but by a kind of very studied self-conscious humility. This is a project in which scientists come not just to figure things out, they come to be improved by an encounter with ancient traditions, Tibetan Buddhism, an ancient Eastern tradition that these scientists believe to be not only morally exemplary, but also deeply wise in the ways of the mind itself. And the fact that it's Tibetan Buddhism, not Quakers, not evangelical preachers. No one's putting the evangelicals into scanners to see what their prefrontal lobes are doing. But you could. And why are we laughing? But we are. The fact that they're not doing that, but instead it's with the monks, allows me, or really demands that I have to put another word on the table alongside enchantment, and that word is, of course, Orientalism. This tendency that Edward Said, of course, helped us to recognize, that people in the West have long had to turn an entity, an imagined entity that they call the East, into their other, their dialogue partner, their antipode, their foil. They turn it into the ancient balm for their modernist woes, the mystical antidote to their rationalist malaise. In this project makes use of many, if not all, of standard Orientalist reference points and tropes, or a certain kind of romantic Orientalism. And in so doing, it's very, very dependent on a particular character, a particular figure, who I'll be talking a bit more about, the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama is a key reason or it was a key catalyst or factor behind the enchanting nature of the Buddhist Brains Project. and he's everywhere in this project. It's known that he is a close personal friend of one of the key scientists, a man named Richard Davidson. If I could have the next slide. There he is looking at a scanner, and Richard Davidson is there on the right looking on. It's known also that he has personally encouraged and approved of all of these monk studies. It's known that he has a strong personal interest in science. He's quite fond of telling the story or saying how, had he not become the Dalai Lama, he would have liked to have been an engineer, and recently wrote a book about his strong interest in science and told lots of stories about that ongoing interest. Since the late 1990s, he's been a favored guest of honor at a series of high-profile meetings about the effects of meditation on brain functioning and health. I have a couple of slides sort of just giving you an aura of that. If we could just do a few more. There's one. This was a nice one. This happened in New York. I think this was in 1999. I don't know if any of you even remember this when the Dalai Lama came to town. There's another one, and one more, and we'll end on that. Oh, right. No, and that actually is we take to the next one. So a series of move on. Just leave it there. This is the Dalai Lama speaking at the 2005 Society of Neuroscience meeting. On the theme of the neuropsychology of meditation. He addressed 13,000 neuroscientists at that meeting. So let me ask what may seem like a sort of silly question, like, why really is he there? He's not a scientist. He's interested in science, but many people might be interested in science. Why is he there? Now, I have watched a lot of these meetings. I have been even a participant in various ways in some of these meetings. And I've wondered about this question. And what I want to propose to you tonight is that he is there functioning above all as an amplifier of a larger cultural message, not so much a scientific message, a cultural message that this is not just business as usual. This is not just an ordinary brain science. This is something deeper and finer and more daring. He does sometimes have interesting things to say. I'm not denying any of that. He does ask interesting questions. But even when he doesn't open his mouth at all, just the bare fact that he's sitting in the room changes everything. It enlarges the meaning of everything else that's said by everyone else, no matter how prosaic that thing might be. We just one more slide. Move to the next slide. And you could even see this. Look at the body language of everyone in this. He is the total focus. And it's not just because he's in the middle, but everything is directed around him. And you may know this.
Sure it's not the flowers?
So he is the catalyst, but it's not at all self-evident how that all came to be. And I want now to move to the next piece of the remarks I want to give you and tell you how we got here. Because it's not necessarily a story you'd know, and it will help us, I think, then to come back to the present and maybe see it with a bit more sophistication. It's going to be a very truncated history, but I'll do my best to not, to at least, keep us oriented. The history about how we got here begins with a cardiologist named Herbert Benson. If I could just move to the next. Yep. Herbert Benson, Harvard cardiologist, who in the early 1970s, interested in stress, interested in developing, but at that point, some kind of behavioral intervention to lower blood pressure in his heart patients, had in the early 1970s an encounter with the counterculture. If I could just have the next slide. A group, I don't even think this needs any glossing, does it? No. Okay, I didn't think so. A group of young people in the early 70s who had learned transcendental meditation from that gentleman in the middle. After transcendental meditation became a huge popular success, not least because of these rather famous students that the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi had for a period of time. These young people came to Herbert Benson and told him, stop studying these monkeys that you're studying. Study us. We can lower our blood pressure. We don't need biofeedback. We don't need operant conditioning. We can just do it with transcendental meditation. And so Benson does. And there's a lot of more to say here, but the bottom line is he does this. He concludes that broadly they're right. They can do this. But they can do other things too. Their respiration changes. Their heartbeat slows down. Basically, he concludes that the practice of transcendental meditation results in a systematic reversal of all the various signature signs of the stress response. It's a kind of perfect, natural, built-in antidote to stress. And he calls it the relaxation response, which is something I think probably those of us of a certain age have heard of. He does this, and then he goes on, and this is quite an important part, he goes on to say that these findings of his, these findings about the relaxation response bear in no way on the truth or relevance of any counterculture popular beliefs about Asian meditative practices. There's nothing to say, this is not an Eastern story, he says. It's simply a physiology story. It's a physiological finding. He attempts to thoroughly dissociate it from all of its kooky, counterculture, Maharishi Yogi, earlier associations, turns it into a straightforward, practical, disenchanted, if you want to use the word, affair. He turns it into something like yoga, not like jogging, or taking vitamins, a thing that's good for you, but not an enchanted thing. And he has considerable success in this disenchanted approach to meditation. Particularly after 1975, if I can have the next slide, he publishes the relaxation response, which becomes a big bestseller. That comes out in 1975. In 1979, Benson meets the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, in 1979, is taking his first trip to the United States. The visa for this trip had been granted to him by the U.S. government very reluctantly. He had been indicating for some years that he wanted to come to the United States, but because the United States was building on the first diplomatic efforts that had been laid down under the Nixon administration, there was a real sort of weariness about doing anything too dramatic that might upset the delicate work going on there. So in the Carter years, under pressure from human rights groups, they decided they will issue the visa. It was on the strict condition that the Dalai Lama agreed to come not as an exiled head of state, simply as a religious teacher on a spiritual visit. There must be no discussion of the Chinese. There must be no discussion of anything political at all. If I could have the next slide. So he's as good as his word. He's in the United States for 49 days. He goes to this city and that city. Every time reporters ask him about China or anything political, he cleverly deflects the question or makes a joke or laughs. He goes on to talk about interreligious dialogue and ethics and other safe, appropriate themes. And when he has a chance, he also likes to talk about science, it proves, on this trip. For example, he participates in a meeting of scholars in Texas on this trip where he tells them, if I could have the next slide, I'd like to listen to your experiences. I want to hear, for example, what's the latest research into the relationships between consciousness and matter? How do they affect each other? Now, I've read sort of the article about that meeting, and it turns out the scholars in Texas knew nothing about this, and that conversation didn't go anywhere. But a few days later, he comes over to Harvard, where he meets Herbert Benson, and Herbert Benson has lots of things he wants to tell the Dalai Lama about consciousness and matter and the brain. He tells the Dalai Lama all about his meditation studies. And then he says, Your Holiness, I actually have a request of my own. I have a request of you. He tells him that he would like to take his research on meditation, on the physiology of meditation, to the next stage. He knows that there is an esoteric Tibetan meditative practice called tumo, this sort of inner heat meditation. This is a form of meditation in which advanced practitioners are claimed to be able to regulate their body temperature in such a way that they do not get cold or suffer and suffer even under frigid weather conditions. And some of you have heard about the wet sheets, and they go into the meditation and steam starts rising off the sheets as they meditate in cold weather. And they have competitions who can dry the sheets first, and all this is in the lore of meditation. And he says, if this could truly be done, and there was some reason from biofeedback research in this time to think that maybe it wasn't completely crazy to think this might be able to be done. But if it could, it would be of great medical interest and physiological interest. Would the Dalai Lama assist him, Benson asks, in gaining access to these advanced Tibetan meditators? Now, as Benson always recalls the conversation, the Dalai Lama was very immediate and straightforward. He puts it, His Holiness agreed to help me. He did. But others who have looked in more carefully at this episode have been inclined to see a lot more strategy and interest in the reason why the Dalai Lama agreed to help Herbert Benson. Because initially the Dalai Lama was inclined, was going to say no. These monks do what they do for religious reasons. It would disturb their practice to have researchers coming in with, various kinds of machines to study them. But then apparently he thought again, and apparently said to one or more of his Tibetan advisors who were in the room with him, if I could have the next slide, still, our friends to the east might be impressed with a Western explanation of what we're doing. In other words, if that's the gloss, this might impress the Chinese, who were in these years and have continued spending a great deal of time trivializing all of Tibetan religious practices as empty superstition, no value in the modern world. And it was at this point that he then turned back to Benson and said he could do the studies. So, you see, the Dalai Lama was not allowed to be overtly political on this trip, and he wasn't, but he's not going to turn down an opportunity to assist the Tibetan cause or to change potentially the dynamic of Sino-Tibetan relations if one just opens up for him. And besides, he later says, even if it doesn't change the dynamic of the Chinese situation, people in the West will benefit because might be impressed with this similar explanation, and there'll be larger benefits all around. So Benson carries out his studies. If I could just have the next slide. And the slide after that. I'm not going to talk about those studies here because I'm not that interested in the details. I'm happy to come back to them. The studies are controversial, but you see, he did publish in Nature. Again, these things are not being published purely in sort of kooky sideline journals, but in respectable mainstream ones. But what I'm going to focus on as important about this event is the fact that a door had been opened. A door had been opened between brain science and these most esoteric and normally hidden practices of Tibetan Buddhist spiritual traditions, partly for political reasons. And in that way, the decision had, this decision in turn had set the stage or created a foundation for the emergence of what we're trying to get to, this re-enchantment project focused on advanced Tibetan monk practitioners. And it happens this way. How do we get to the enchantment? Because I said that Benson had explicitly repudiated a kind of enchantment project, that for him it was all about normalization and disenchanting these practices, and that was no less true really in the Tumo studies. But the door had been opened, and others were going to walk into that door who didn't necessarily share those same values. And if I could now have the next slide. What we see in the early 1990s is a psychologist named Richie Davidson introduced to the Dalai Lama at a meeting in 1991, a meeting organized to allow the Dalai Lama to interact with scientists on the theme of the health benefits of meditation. Now, Davidson, unlike Benson, was a child of the counterculture. He had been a graduate student at Harvard in the 1970s. He was very influenced by Ram Dass, formerly Richard Albert, colleague of Timothy Leary. He flirted with TM. He'd gone on extended retreats in India. His professors didn't think he'd ever come back and finish his PhD, but he did. In the end, he cuts his hair. He gets a job in a first-rate institution. He gets respect in mainstream psychology, and he gets rather quiet about this earlier phase in his career, in which he's very interested in the Eastern, in Buddhism and meditation and in these other values. But now he has his meeting with the Dalai Lama, and this is now a little bit of psychologizing, but it seems to me, and I know Richie Davidson, and I've talked to him a fair bit about this, and some of what I've told you I know because he's told me, but it isn't a secret. He talks freely in interviews about this as well. Some string gets plucked again. And at that meeting, and in that context, questions start to be asked in the conference itself about what's known about the physiology and psychology, not just of sort of college students practicing transcendental meditation like Benson had been doing. What's known about the physiology and psychology of real, serious, advanced meditation? And people said, well, we actually don't know very much about it at all, and what we think we know isn't reliable. And then people said, well, we have a connection here to Tibetan monastic culture. Maybe we can bring equipment into the field and actually study these people. But only, of course, if His Holiness, if the Dalai Lama allows us. And so, like Benson had done 11 years earlier, they asked him. And like he had done in 1979, 11 years earlier, he says yes. In a different time, with a different Dalai Lama, in a different political culture, probably the answer would have been no. But it wasn't. He said yes. They could study the monks. They take this on, motivated again by quite a different kind of cultural energy, I think, than motivated Benson. Parenthetically, it turns out that their first effort, bringing equipment up the hillside to the hills above Dharamsala, is a total, it fails, because the monks actually are very suspicious of what they're doing. They don't get it. They're afraid the equipment might hurt them. They also don't really see the point. If you want to learn about meditation, we'll teach you. Come on in, sit down, and we'll teach you all about meditation. What are these machines here for? It's only when a final variable is introduced into the picture. If I could have the next slide. This man, Mathieu Ricard, that things begin to turn a corner. Mathieu is a senior Tibetan monk living in Nepal, but he, as you could perhaps tell from his face, he is not Tibetan. He is French-born. You can also tell from his name. And 30 years earlier, before he entered Tibetan monastic life, he had been a graduate student in biochemistry in Paris, working under the Nobel laureate Francois Jacob. So he doesn't fear science. He's willing, upon being asked now, to volunteer his own brain. And not only that, with the blessing and encouragement of the Dalai Lama, he's willing to go back to Nepal and get those other monks involved. And he's able to succeed in a way that the researchers couldn't. And so they come to Richie's lab in Wisconsin, and these studies begin that then are out there that I told you about. Now, all this still might not have turned into an enchantment project if it hadn't been for one last thing. The fact that the 1990s wasn't actually just the decade of the brain. It was also the decade of America's love affair with Tibet. Think of the timing here. In 1989, the Dalai Lama wins the Nobel Peace Prize for his nonviolent efforts to negotiate a peaceful settlement for the Tibetan cause. And in the wake of the Peace Prize, he begins to travel ever more frequently into the United States. And as he does, Western followers of the Dalai Lama, eloquent Western followers like Bob Thurman at Columbia, if I could have the next slide, craft a message about the meaning of Tibetan culture and Tibetan Buddhism that emphasizes its relevance as an antidote for the malaise of modern Western life. Tibetan culture is not just for Tibetans. Thurman insists that it's a global resource. It's for everyone. It offers a path to a rich, value-filled life that, in contrast to many of our homegrown religious traditions, doesn't set itself in opposition to science and rationality, isn't dogmatic, is wholly compatible with these other kinds of values of science and rationality that we care about. In fact, he says, there's an important way in which Tibetan Buddhism is itself a kind of science, a science of the mind, an inner science that he contrasts then with outer science, with external science, and that we, focused as we are so much on the external, have so much to learn from. And he writes, here I believe their culture contains an inner science particularly relevant to the difficult time in which we live, and that's, I want to share it. Next slide. So, it's this sense of hope in a difficult time that animates a lot of the current interest in Buddhist brains, I think, that gives this project a lot of its enchanted quality. But as I have watched it develop over time, I've also been increasingly struck by the real instabilities that I see lying at the heart of this particular strategy for re-enchanting the brain sciences, coming now back to the larger project and what kind of an effort this might be and how good it is. I think that it's an unstable project in enchantment for at least two reasons. The first reason has to do with a real tension that I see between the mainstreaming goals of this work, the desire to have these things published in first-ranked scientific, peer-reviewed scientific journals, and the re-enchanting goals of this project. Because unlike what we saw, or what we didn't really see, but I sort of gestured at with Köhler back in the 1930s, there's not any metaphysical claims being made in this project. There's not any explicit challenges to conventional naturalistic understandings about the mind and brain or about how brain science should be done. In this project, happiness still gets translated into enhanced left prefrontal activation. Compassionate states of consciousness still get translated into gamma waves. It's the unique cast of characters and all that they symbolize to us that makes this a project appear to be something more than that, something enchanted. Again and again, we have these symbols of opposition between East and West, ancient and modern, outer and inner appearing. You remember the image from the New York Magazine, the Dalai Lama in electrodes, Mathieu Ricard in his flowing scarlet robes in a scanning machine, all suggesting somehow that East, West, ancient and modern come together to create something different, new, and so on. If you were to put Mathieu Ricard in sweatpants and a T-shirt, it shouldn't change anything, but I don't know, but my guess is this would not be as exciting a project. And this point takes me to the second reason that I think this is an unstable project, and it has to do with the Dalai Lama himself. Because he is, in this narrative of enchantment, he is the embodiment of ancient Eastern wisdom engaging with modern science. But in fact, that's a role that he occupies really rather awkwardly, or fulfills really only partially. He is very interested in science. I've never gotten the impression that he's actually interested in enchanting the sciences. On the contrary, I get the sense that he brings a very practical and even quite modernist attitude to his interest in science, and one that's clearly partially motivated by his sense that for Tibetan Buddhism to survive in a modern world with the reality of the Chinese, it's going to have to modernize its own understandings of itself. I spoke very, very briefly right at the beginning of the talk about this Society of Neuroscience meeting that he spoke at in 2005. What I didn't tell you is that in the course of his remarks to those 13,000 neuroscientists, he came out with a quite remarkable statement. It wasn't in his prepared script. He was talking about his support for research into the brain basis of meditation, and then he went on to say that in his view, meditation actually could be seen as nothing more than a technology for rewiring the brain, and that it's very time-consuming to meditate. There could be other equally productive technologies that could be equally beneficial. He said the following. Next. If it was possible to become free of negative emotions by a riskless implementation of an electrode, without impairing intelligence and the critical mind, I would be your first patient. Now that is a disenchanting moment. And later I asked some of my colleagues what they thought of that. And the reaction was very telling. They said, he didn't mean it. It was a joke, they said. Now, he smiles a lot. It's hard to sort of know. But the reaction is what's interesting here. He couldn't have meant it. It was a joke. Now, the history here isn't over. A final appraisal of this enchantment effort isn't really possible yet, but I think regardless of what happens, we should be keeping an eye on this if we're interested. We should be keeping an eye in the neurological turn in our culture and all that it's about. We should be keeping an eye on all the enchantment projects that I think are out there. I think there are others, and I think it'll be fun for me to have an opportunity to talk about some other things that I think are also going on. But in part, if as we think about what this means and what kind of future history we're likely to be writing about our own time, if part of what we see in the current neurological turn in our culture is a decision by our society to grant the brain sciences a hugely expanded realm of authority to pronounce on what it means to be a human being, then another part, I think, of what we're also seeing are some preemptive attempts to ensure that the idiom and practices of the brain sciences don't undermine too drastically the claims of human experience, of human values, that in the various efforts going on within the brain sciences to push back against disenchantment, the claim is that, yes, okay, we're brains, we can be brains, but we can be brains inside a roomier kind of understanding of brain science research that still has room for more of the kinds of things we care about. So why don't I stop with that? Thank you.
That was wonderful. It was truly wonderful. Thank you very much. I think we're going to have to move right on to the next speaker because of the time constraint. No, he didn't. He's right there. No. And if there's time at the end for a couple of questions for each of the speakers, then we'll take those questions. But please know that tomorrow at 10:30 there will be a roundtable with all the speakers and 2 additional participants, and there will be plenty of time after the discussion at that roundtable for you to ask your questions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce John Forrester, who is Professor of History and Philosophy of the Sciences at Cambridge, where he has taught for the last 30 years. He is the author of Language and the Origins of Psychoanalysis, The Seductions of Psychoanalysis, Freud, Lacan, and Derrida, Freud's Women, which he wrote with Lisa Apignanesi, Dispatches from the Freud Wars, Psychoanalysis and Its Passions, and Truth Games, Lies, Money, and Psychoanalysis. And that's as intriguing a book as its title indicates it might be. Dr. Forrester is also the co-translator of the 2 volumes of Jacques Lacan, The Seminar. He's currently completing 2 books, one that he is co-authoring called Freud in Cambridge, which is a study of the reception of psychoanalysis in Cambridge in the early 20th century, and The Freudian Century, A Cultural History of Psychoanalysis. And Dr. Forrester is going to talk to us tonight on the destiny of psychoanalysis and the failure of scientific naturalism.
Thank you very much. Rainey Daston couldn't be here this evening, so she asked if she could read a copy of this lecture. And she told me, boy, it's bleak. So, this is going to be a tricky one. The grey world awaits. Now, my lecture is an exploration of the connection between scientific naturalism and psychoanalysis. The guiding thread is the following idea. Psychoanalysis, as invented and propounded by Freud, appeared as the natural, almost inevitable extension of the imperialistic project of scientific naturalism. As a result, appreciating the historical destiny of psychoanalysis, its origins, its rise, its failures, will tell us much about the character of scientific naturalism. And so, transposing from a bounded historical past to the unbounded present, I will pose some questions about the present condition of scientific naturalism and of its knock-on effects on the relation of the sciences to norms and values. However, it turns out that scientific naturalism is not a neutral and uncontroversial description of an attitude to the world or a project of research, nor is it historically static. Scientific naturalism is as often used by its opponents and critics as it is by its proponents. To call someone an allegiant of scientific naturalism is a version of name-calling. It is to conjure up the bad old days when the holy trinity of Marx, Freud, and Darwin constituted serious threats to Western civilization. In a sense, my lecture will be about how the bad old days have certainly gone away, but the repressed that has returned in their place may not be to anyone's liking. Scientific naturalism is a term very much linked to Victorian science. It was then, and has been pretty much ever since, defined as much by its opponents, by its position in a rivalrous contest of professional and ideological power, as by its internal credo and practices. Insofar as it was allied with positivism, its principal contentions were negative and admonitory. The only form of knowledge worthy of the name is positive science, based upon empirical correlations summed up by general laws. Where positivism was agnostic about causes, scientific naturalism added the metaphysical claim that the only causal entities in the world are natural ones, specifically, for many advocates, material entities. However, the key distinguishing term of contrast for scientific naturalism was always the supernatural in some form. And the attachment to materialism was not the distinctive or important feature of scientific naturalism, since among its many proponents, including the Holy Trinity of Marx, Darwin, and Freud, materialism was of variable significance. Freud, in particular, coming near on half a century after Marx and Darwin, their true son and heir rather than co-conspirator, was to his bones a scientific materialist. But this did not stop him developing, in the name of scientific naturalism, an autonomous science of the mind. But if Freud was in a sense a superficially fickle materialist, ready to give up his old convictions in response to a canny assessment of the scientific possibilities open to a theoretically ambitious speculator of the 1890s, the route he took via an autonomous mental science was no less naturalist and no less hostile to the claims of the opponents of naturalism. Indeed, it was by jumping ship and becoming a committed mentalist, while retaining all the old baggage of being a materialist, that Freud forged what I take to be the crowning glory of the pugnacious era of scientific naturalism. A double whammy consisting of an attack from the depths, matter, flesh, sex, and a steamroller of scientific determinism and post-religious amoralism in the realm of spirit, values, and the mind. Now, I've used the term post-religious, and religion will of necessity figure in the story I will unfold. But what does it mean to be post-religious? That by now classic monument to the brief hegemony of psychoanalysis in American life, Philip Reif's Freud, The Mind of the Moralist, penned in part without acknowledgement by his then wife, Susan Sontag, gives a definition in a by-the-way footnote. If you can bring the slide up. By post-religious, I mean an attitude so far removed from ultimate concern that neither piety nor atheism can appeal to it. Religion is accepted, like any other service, as another good to be consumed by those who have a taste for it. One of the speculations contained in this lecture will be the question of when was the post-religious era, and do we inhabit it now? Reif's footnote was meant to clarify his claim that Freud spoke naturally and easily to an audience on the whole post-religious and unfamiliar with the lines of self-criticism laid down by the theologians. Upon many brought up within a weak or defensive religious environment, his arguments for atheism have had a great emancipating impact, giving them reasons for a break already in process. Struck me thinking about this passage, the word emancipating is interesting. Emancipation from religion, emancipation from slavery, it's the same kind of movement. We are very much in the Enlightenment here, you might say. So if the great era of Victorian scientific naturalism was so significant, it was not simply because of a contest of ideologies or because of the strange progeny to which it gave rise: scientific supernaturalism, scientific religion, Christian Science, and all the other surprising inventions of the Victorian religious temper. It was also because it was a part of a contest for power in the professions and the rise for the first time of a career structure associated with the sciences. Whether it was the educational reforms of Jules Ferry in France or Bismarck's Kulturkampf and the associated shifts in educational exclusion and promotion in Imperial Germany, or the professional wedges produced by Huxley and his collaborators in Victorian England, or the combination of high school reform and expansion of scientific teaching in the United States, scientific naturalism was linked to contests of power, authority, and to jobs in the establishment of the modern educational system. And we must never forget that the modern university is a German invention and bears the marks of its birth still. So Freud's work was developed by a late product of the movement of scientific naturalism, yet his audience was of an entirely different era. Rieff put the accent in this passage on the emancipation of atheists, quite ready to lose any faith or belief they had, quite ready to lose any faith or belief they had been lumbered with by the dying religious culture. And it was in keeping with his larger overall thesis of the emergence of psychological man for whom Freudianism was the recipe for living. So the fundamental backdrop for Rieff's argument is the demise of traditional systems of belief. He places himself and his culture, America after the bomb, in the mainstream of modernist disenchantment. Once upon a time, there were religions. Then came modernity and its quintessential prophet. Quote a passage here. Freud's work would lose in coherence without the positivist estimate of a contemporary crisis of belief. So the opening salvo places psychoanalysis emphatically in the arena of this crisis with the promise of scientific salvation. Bereft of religion and betrayed by the spurious objectivity of so many sciences, the modern mind has found nothing so convincing as a science that is at the same time a casuistry of the intimate and everyday life. Drinking water like this always reminds me of that E. Cummings poem. It starts next to, of course, God, America, I love thee. And the last line is, the speaker spoke rapidly and drank a glass of water. Very appropriate first line, you might say. So, Rieff appears to start with a model of a vacuum of beliefs created by the progressive retreat of religion. The human mind abhors this vacuum, so has eagerly turned to a science that offers itself as a moral system, like religion, psychoanalysis, which Rieff calls a popular science of morals that also teaches a moral system. Rieff gives some sense of how psychoanalysis inevitably ends up as a moral system. It becomes infected, as it were, by the disease for which it is itself the cure. Freud's protest against illusion is hidden beneath a science whose very nature as a moral science it denies. For the illness it proposes to treat scientifically is precisely our inherited morality, and therefore it is, in its own terms, both a natural and a moral science. The ingredients that psychoanalysis offers to the burgeoning refugees from religion keep being added to in Rief's account. There is the science, there is the moral system, and then there is the therapy, modelled loosely on a medical relationship. Having made himself over into a new kind of doctor, Freud could claim all society as his patient. Maybe there's another quote here. No, not yet, I don't think. As a new kind of doctor, Freud offered a new kind of therapy. Therapy implies an intention to convert, to criticize one way of life, and to work toward another. This is because the causal account of therapeutic efficacy includes the claim that belief systems can be bad for your health. Indeed, that your psychic health depends on getting the right belief systems. Yet these are not ordinary belief systems. These are unconscious belief systems, ones that are elaborated and developed through the repudiation of the previously other unconsciously held belief system. So while Rief introduces psychoanalysis as one belief system alongside others, claiming the place once occupied by religions, Marxism or positivism, he then introduces a second theme, the dialectical theme of psychoanalysis as an antidote to belief in general. So far as it clears away this is a quote again, so far as it clears away the residual identities that make people ill, Freudianism does not thereby destroy its own capacity to forge a new identity, for it helps bring to life what is essentially a counter-identity. Once the patient is free of the last authority, the therapist, he has achieved the only possible and real freedom. He is himself alone, however diminished that self may be. Thus are disengagements masked as liberations, modest encouragements to life for its own sake, proposed as an ideal of freedom. I think that last phrase performs what Rief wants to say psychoanalysis does, which is it diminishes everything in life back down to the prosaic everyday, any illusions like hope. I mean, these are the things you have to get away from if you're properly psychoanalyzed, and then you're just, you're the prospect of that cocktail at 6 o'clock might be the only realistic thing in life to hope for. What can be sold in public as grand promises, with grandiose ideals, redolent of majestic themes in the history of political and cultural thought, turn out to be modest replacements for the grandiosities of these old religiosities, disengagements and encouragements that look to the unreconstructed as epiphanies and conversions. Rief contrasts the ideal of psychological man with the previous regimes, principally those of the ancients, political man, the Christians, religious man, and the Enlightenment rationalists, which is economic man. As the aristocratic Roman summoned his philosopher when he was ill, as the Christian went to his pastor, so the dispirited modern visits his analyst. But the psychoanalyst does not compete with older therapists. His is not a therapy of belief, but one which instructs how to live without belief. Rendering the psychoanalytic imperative as living without beliefs does not appear controversial or implausible when confronted in Freud's descriptions with religious actions and the associated compulsive thoughts, otherwise known as prayer and doctrine and so forth. However, in the late 20th century, the treatment of choice for such bizarre acts became cognitive behavioral therapy, or when the pharmaceutical companies realized how endemic such conditions were, condition-specific drugs. CBT aimed to train sufferers out of their fears and preoccupations. Gone was the psychoanalytic conception that normal and pathological beliefs might have the same structure. Gone was the notion that religious rituals and obsessive actions served the same ends and had the same mechanism. Indeed, the lessons of acquiring respect for the alien beliefs and strange actions of others were built into the very definition of what constituted a symptom at the end of the 20th century. The conditions for ascribing a delusional belief to a person are that, firstly, other people with similar cultural backgrounds would find the delusional belief unacceptable and implausible, and secondly, that the delusion is resistant to evidence to the contrary. That's a definition taken from a book published in 1998 on pathologies of belief. A sort of cognitive psychology textbook, really. Now, there is no dimension in that of cultural critique. There's no dimension of cultural critique in today's cognitive sciences, one might say. There's no notion that the very category of belief might be pathological. Being corrosive of all beliefs was Freud's way of bringing to its soberly triumphant inevitable conclusion the program of scientific naturalism. It seemed to Freud and many others in the early 20th century that science could only be a critic of religion, could only be a critic of any alternative systems of belief, including ethical systems, which were grounded in religion but had become completely secular. Freud undercut the meaning and significance of religious ritual and action by the comparison with neurosis. And he undercut the status of religious beliefs by characterizing them as being on the borderline between illusion and delusion. And in an entirely separate argument, he undercut the status of moral systems of rules, beliefs, and action by implanting the Nietzschean doubt that any strongly held or felt moral action founded on belief, or simply the result of moral conviction or unassailable intuition, would be compounded, if not strictly determined, by unconscious motives. Every act of pity would be mobilized by unconscious contempt or sadism. Every act of love was ready to reveal its ambivalent obverse of hate. Every act of self-sacrifice paid tribute to some long-dead, forlorn love for a feared authority. My relation to others can never be free of sadism and masochism, aggression and the death instinct. Indeed, morality itself is always conducted within that sphere of sadomasochism, especially when it conforms to conventional codes, when I am being good. Not only could we never be certain of the purity of our motives, but we might have to recognize that the things we loved best about ourselves might be the distorted end products of what we despised most. And it's telling that Freud's most forthright statement about what he thinks morality as a positive element is that it's a highway code. Morality is a highway code for the conduct of relations between human beings. Now, there's absolutely nothing meaningful about a highway code. It is a system of conventions and rules, and therefore one should think of morality as essentially like table manners. It's how you eat in society, and it's how you get on in society. That's morality. So it's inherently a meaningless system of conventions. Leave that to one side. The subversion of the very possibility of a justified morality that this entails was not only a result of the psychoanalytic intervention. There was Nietzsche, of course, but also the general failure of the rival secular moral systems of justification, Kantian, utilitarian, Aristotelian, which Alasdair MacIntyre diagnosed so acutely in his wonderful book, After Virtue. MacIntyre depicted these failures as leading to the covert victory of the doctrine of emotivism in the early 20th century. Another quote. Emotivism is the doctrine that all evaluative judgments, and more specifically all moral judgments, are nothing but expressions of preference, expression of attitude or feeling. The twist in the tale of MacIntyre's depiction of moral philosophy in the 20th century is that there are many good refutations of the theory of emotivism, and there are also good refutations of deontological or consequentialist approaches. But in point of fact, everyone behaves as if emotivism were true. When someone says it's wrong to lie to your nearest and dearest, it's assumed by many that this amounts to saying, I disapprove of lying to your intimates, and I want to persuade you to feel likewise. So moral argument is a statement of personal preference, usually founded on passion blended with argument, and a conviction that others should think likewise. This subjectification, this individualization, this psychologization, call it what you will, converges so neatly with psychoanalysis, even though there is scant attention paid in psychoanalytic literature to the foundations of moral judgment. It is self-evidently one of the reasons why MacIntyre invokes three characters for the 20th century who embody its moral temper. He talks about the aesthete, the manager, and the therapist. And here we recall, as if we could forget it, that psychoanalysis is not simply a version of scientific naturalism's critique of religion, not simply a genealogy of all moral beliefs and actions which lead to a quotidian amoralism, but also a therapy for the cure of the noxious effects of morality, from the iniquity of civilized sexual morality to the pure culture of the death instinct and the superego, to the rampages of the paranoid schizoid's position's division of the world into good and bad objects. Reef's account of psychological man was always about the kind of people produced by therapy. We might say not only are they post-religious, but they are post-moral. However, things did not quite turn out that way. To be sure, the therapeutic imperative has had its triumph, but more in the form of therapeutic aestheticism than in full secularization, in the triumph of amoralism. So, what Reef foresaw in his category of psychological man, rather we've seen more like the opposite. What we've seen since Reef's vision has been the reaffirmation of traditional and novel forms of ethical community constituted by the illusions of religion, the consumption of lifestyle identities, including the development of eco-niches for those defined by their common sexual interests beyond its prototype in the family. We have seen the politics of identity replace the politics of ideology, with both overwhelmed by the consumerist economics of identity. That's the sort of division of consumptive labour, you might call it. We've seen the rise of religious consumerism, as Reef had intimated, but alongside and often on the model of the development of other cults, such as sport and the entertainment industries, where aesthetics and leisure combine the community of moral conviction in economically crucial new formations. It's this backdrop that is important to understanding the failure of psychoanalysis to deliver a viable amoral culture for psychological man, as much as the more familiar mechanisms by which psychiatry, particularly in the US, lost its psychoanalytic enthusiasm, switching its allegiance instead to psychotropic drugs, and to the Renaissance in those curious reruns of history so well documented by Ian Hacking in his Rewriting the Soul, of the pre-Freudian theories of trauma, urgent with legal and moral imperatives. The grinding to a halt of the amoral verve of psychoanalysis as inheritor of the mantle of scientific naturalism is rendered even more poignant by comparison with the pretender to its ideological position. Evolutionary psychology, developing out of sociobiology, lays claim to be the truly scientific naturalism of our age. From the now classic and in fact ancient focusing on supposed problems for a Darwinian gene-centered account of human social and interpersonal behavior, altruism and homosexuality, there are wings of the discipline that look to offer novel explanations for every area of human activity. Patricia Kitcher's comparative study of the imperialistic pretensions of psychoanalysis in the early 20th century, and then of cognitive science and evolutionary psychology in the late 20th century, was a philosophical warning about the fragility of such a project for interdisciplinary hegemony. But there's no doubt that the project is in full swing. What it has lost in comparison is precisely the ethical bite, or you might say the anti-ethical bite, the bite at the level of the everyday that psychoanalysis had promised and sometimes delivered. Compare the psychoanalytic account of religion with that of evolutionary psychology. Freud's writings on religion had the character of a crusading banner under which the movement could advance. Psychoanalysis followed the rationalist critiques of the Enlightenment, the comparativist and historical critiques of the 19th century, with its psychological critique. It was so effective that it was borrowed wholesale by theologians in their seminaries to provide a new foundation for religious practice. The triumph of the therapeutic was nowhere more evident than in the virtual fusion, under some circumstances, of a religious transformation with personal catharsis. So, psychoanalysis could even offer itself as a new religion, or its simulacrum. There is no more telling sociological observation than Charles Kadushin's 1960 study of psychoanalytic culture in New York, in which he showed how psychoanalysis had become, for many Protestants, and even for some Catholics, a surefire route to becoming what they most aspired to being, a Jewish New Yorker. Evolutionary psychology also aspires to giving an account of religion, but it inhabits in an entirely different manner the more abrasive and ticklish cultural atmosphere of the end of the 20th century, where religious sensibilities must be respected and tiptoed round. So the standard textbooks of evolutionary psychology never mention religion, as if religion were not a prominent part of human psychology. The account of religion that discipline does offer is well defended against the charge of hostility, even of skepticism. For instance, to account for what used to be called animism, or the belief in spirits, ghosts, living presences, recent work proposes a brain module specifically dedicated to these phenomena, the hyperactive agency detection device, introduced by Bartlett, or HADD. Or take another way into the phenomenon. Let's have the next slide. Here's an overview of what evolutionary thinking... There we are. Here's an overview of what evolutionary thinking can offer us in the way of understanding religion. There is now a growing body of evolutionary thinking that connects the following elements of a potential evolutionary framework: features of religious concepts, experimental evidence for underlying cognitive systems, clues about the genetic basis of these systems, and precise hypotheses about the reproductive advantage provided by possession of such capacities. Cognitive systems, genetic basis of these systems, reproductive advantages, in accordance with hypotheses that sometimes can be tested by experimental systems, often in other species. These are the ingredients for a new scientific naturalistic account of religion. It's quite evident how innocuous, in addition to being intellectually anodyne, such theories will be. There is very little chance of a member of the ordinary non-scientific public finding their way to unbelief by studying these scientific papers. Religion becomes hardwired in a brain module, and an evolutionary account is given which, as always with such accounts, makes the covertly unrealistic and delusional claims of religions an ubiquitous byproduct of some other essential evolutionary function, in the same way that Darwin made the evolution of language a byproduct of the noise traffic accompanying mating. What evolutionary psychology lacks is the therapy to match. Without the therapy, whose absence is explicitly regretted by some theorists who say we will be much more powerful in modern society once we get some therapeutic efficacy into our science. So without the therapy, this is a scientific naturalism that cannot get a grip on culture at large. But, you might reply, psychoanalytic therapy never managed to get that grip either. It only promised to do so. And the riposte to that can only be, at least it offered the prospects of a means of infiltrating culture at the ground level, of allowing reefs, disengagements masked as liberations, modest encouragements to life for its own sake, proposed as an ideal of freedom. It offered room for manoeuvre with the inevitable injustice of moral codes, of the possibility of living in unbelief. Its successor at the beginning of the 21st century offers an apology for the inevitability of human cognitive error and misplaced affective attachment. Compared with the aspirations of the first scientific naturalism in its overambitious Freudian guise, it has sold its birthright for a mess of pottage. Thank you.
Another enchanting talk. I thank you very much, and I think we have time for perhaps a couple of questions before we draw the evening to a close.
Can we stand up together?
Sure, please. Yes, Jerry Fuchs.
This is Professor Harrington. I was intrigued by the first part of your talk, and I would agree with you that I, businessman, finds that neuroscience is a little premature in its claims, and I think there's sort of some future fantasy involved, but time will tell what it will produce. And the second part of your talk, on the physiology of the Tibetans and whether the physiological results of the Tibetan mind is indicative of some enchantment. There have been a lot of studies on the Himalayan people in particular, we'll say Sherpas, and their physiology is quite different. The Sherpa, even the lung structure of the Sherpa is quite different, which enables them to do something. So I just wondered whether that's been filtered into the talk. On the second part, there's a remarkable movie here in New York now, I think it's called The Deep Silence, and it's a film that was done on the monks of Chartreuse, and they filmed a very ascetic group of Catholic monks who don't talk, and they only talk at the end of the seventh day or something. I wonder if you did physiological studies on them, that you would come up with several things. Just in your presentation, I'm not sure what gamma rays mean, etc., but I would imagine that people that eat very little, talk very little, meditate a great deal, have a different anxiety structure and mind structure, but I'm not quite sure what that means.
Let me read the first question. I don't think I would say that studying people with unusual or even extraordinary physiology itself is maybe a necessary, but isn't a sufficient basis for an enchantment. So, for example, studies of people who live at very, very high altitudes, like Sherpas, and who have perhaps extraordinary lung capacity, they could be very interesting, but it wouldn't in itself necessarily provide the basis or the nucleus for the kind of thing I was interested in, which is the use and an attempt to find in or to surround projects in brain science with a sense of a larger meaning, value-laden meaning.
The Tibetans are Himalayan people.
Right. So there could be all sorts of ways to do this kind of work that I would not particularly call enchanted. There could be ways of studying people with, who practice. Supposing you were to put chess grandmasters into a scanning machine, and supposing they also 50,000 to 100,000 hours of intense practice of various chess moves, and you ask them visualize the first move of a chess game, and you might see gamma rays. I don't know, no one's done it, and you need to tell me about the gammas. You might see evidence of intense attentional capacity that would rival that of the monks. and it wouldn't mean the same thing. You might take Baryshnikov, there are extraordinary people in our own culture. We're not studying extraordinary, chess masters and ballet dancers and people who really, through training have done amazing things, or through accident of, where they live have unusual physiology, and we're not looking at those. So I guess the answer to the first part of your question is I wouldn't have talked about the Sherpas or about other kinds of things one can say about Tibetans, because it wasn't really about Tibetans and their physiology. Of course, that's part of it, but it's really about what we think it means for us and our sense of feeling bereft in a world without values. So now, the second part of your question had to do with non-Asian, with Christian traditions and where they might fit. And that's a more interesting, that's not more interesting, the other question is interesting too, but that's more relevant to the point of the Enchantment Project, because why not look at home? Why not look to our own contemplative traditions? Why wouldn't we find it enlarging and expansive and wonderful to study these people who are living in monastic settings, but practicing a Christian faith? And the answer is that, first of all, they think maybe you would, but the fact that they're not doing it. I made this sort of joke. It wasn't really meant to be a joke, but about the evangelical, that no one's putting evangelicals into scanners, and everybody laughed. And I said, why are we laughing? Here's a kind of, there's a more complicated reason why we're laughing, but let me say, one reason why they're not doing it in a funny way might actually have to do with the fact of how fully they buy into the Weberian thesis. You can't find, perhaps, Weber said in a sense, the forces of modernity and rationalization don't just stop, that the effects of modernity and rationalization in science, in a sense, become fully corrosive. Everything becomes rationalized. Everything becomes kind of de-souled. You can't find this stuff at home. You can't find what you need to feed your soul back home. And so the temptation of looking to our homegrown spiritual traditions, if you believe that, isn't there. You need to go far away to the exotic East because they never were modern, or so the story goes. And they have everything that we've lost, and they can complete us and heal us. I hope that kind of at least touched on your two questions.
I understand what you're saying. It wasn't that I'm saying special people like the Sherpas. I just had the impression that what you were saying, since the brain studies of this particular culture, which happens to be a Himalayan culture, nonetheless, since it is a Himalayan culture, it has certain characteristics with other people who are non-Tibetan. Brain structure and whose aerobic system is quite different than normal people living in ocean levels. And I think you're also referring to primitivism. If the studies in Guinea, for example, would produce some enchanting results to verify, maybe not with gamma rays, but the other rays. I don't know, but it just, I'm just struck by the proof that you're giving. I'm wondering about the subject.
First a Q and then Larry.
This is a question addressed to Jan Faust. You pointed out that in Freud, morality is treated as just a mere set of conventions. I think your analogy was taken as. And that's right, it says that on the surface. But he says something sort of more deeply disturbing when he adds that these are just second-order drives to curb sort of first-order drives. And that is more deeply scientifically naturalistic, see what I mean? That is the adoption of these conventions. These conventions, somebody might say, falls outside the orbit of naturalism, because they're so. But when the conventions themselves are treated as mere second-order drives to curb one's first-order drives, then it's just naturalism all the way up and down. You see what I mean?
I'm not sure if I agree exactly with that. I was slightly worried about the highway code analogy or the table analogy, because that was, as it were, Freud when he was off duty. and someone comes to him and say, "Oh, I've got a moral problem in life." And Freud said, "Oh, moral problems are simple. There's no agony about it. It's just like a highway code. It's a set of conventions, and you mustn't attach any importance to moral codes. But we always do." Now that's the twist. So when he goes on duty, he knows that people are incredibly attached to their moral convention. They can't free themselves of them in the same way they can't free themselves of their beloved objects. They love morality and they hate it in the same way as they love and hate the whole network of the family and so forth. So, and he thinks of the morality as being like, being in a family. And that's complex reactions to it. But that's so that naturalism comes in from that observation of that, and also the additional observation that there is no other foundation for morality than that system of behaviour, of our attachment to these rules and these codes. So I agree with you, it's first and second order of naturalism. But there is this attachment to the notion of convention. Now, can one bring meaningless convention into a naturalistic account? I'm not sure if one can. It's an interesting question, I think. But I'll leave it there.
Harry Friedman.
I have comments and questions for both, but I'm particularly interested in the Dalai Lama's that strange quotation that you made. You'd be happy to have a lecture. You could wait for it. But I wonder if it really is so odd as it may seem. We're likely, I think, looking at his culture to surround, and this I think is your point, to surround what they're doing with this, what you might call an aesthetic precedence, which if you grow up in it, and especially if you're the dean of it, so to speak, may be less important than the ultimate object. And so for him, the tranquility, or whatever the term was that he used, as an end stage is what he's interested in, and what he may very well feel has transcendent significance. And if you were to bring that about by an electrode, fine. He's not attached to the chant or the color of the saffron robe. Very much as a physicist, for example, if you were to say, well, you have all these wonderful calculations, and you're trying to find the unified theory of physical laws, and you're doing it with all these wonderful calculations and with telescopes and whatnot. If I could just plant an electrode in one particular part of your brain, and it would give you the answer, would you say, no, I need all the mathematics, I want all the telescopes, that's us, and that's our profession.
Fun.
Yeah, fun. But I don't think you would say that at all. I said, give me the electrode fast, and let me find out.
I think it's very
they want an answer.
What he also said is, he said it takes a lot of time. I have to spend hours every day.
Yeah, it's a practical
and I think you're absolutely right. And it would have been, had my colleagues, when I asked them this, sort of said something as interesting as you just said, I might have come to a different kind of conclusion. They said, no, we need the whole surround. We're threatened by this. And in terms of why he might have said this and how it might have looked from the other side, it wasn't really, at least at that moment, the thing. I think that's very interesting what you just said.
But the quote from the Dalai Lama was negative emotions.
Yes.
That's what he wanted to get rid of.
That's a good point.
And retain critical thinking.
Yeah, there would be no downside, no risk. It was a thought experiment, but that he wouldn't object to.
Even that characterization, I'm glad you remember. I didn't remember the actual words. Negative emotion. That's something more than just. I use the word tranquility, but negative emotion already may convey.
Constructive. These are these things.
It convey a transcendent meaning, because the negativity is a word. So
I don't know exactly about the transcendent, or whether or not, because there's various levels at which he will speak to the West, and he adopts a very self-consciously secular tone, and is very interested in using the sciences also as a base, independent of what he's trying to do in Tibet in his modernization efforts. He's also very interested in finding a secular basis for ethics that will allow us to move beyond tribalism and so on. And so when he's talking there, he may be talking in a secular register, and I couldn't say whether in a different register. Sometimes he will, I've heard him say things like, this is a conversation, this is just for Tibetans. We're going to stay focused on other things. So maybe transcendent, but maybe he wouldn't have been prepared if you asked him in that context to actually go on record. You look like you want to say something. Your mouth is open.
Perhaps from just sheer bewilderment, but no, I'm thinking. I don't pin anything particular on the words, but it does strike me.
Well, certainly a valued mind.
He didn't say, for example, we can do with anxiety and hostility.
Negative emotions. It's an ethical statement.
It's an ethical statement.
That's true. That is definitely true. So in that sense, it's a valued state of mind because it's an ethical state of mind. So that takes us back to our feelings.
Francis and then Marcia Cavell.
Firstly, I want to thank both of you for coming, to thank Lois and Akil for so diligently putting together such a thoughtful and evocative.
It's not over yet. Wait.
But I'm thanking you now because I don't know if I'll have a chance to thank you later on. And I just the Authoritative Center was sort of founded and influenced by the famous C.P. Snow essay Culture. I mean, it was subliminally influenced by it and manifestly influenced by it. And but at the same time, as I was hearing both of your presentations, I couldn't help thinking that maybe they aren't reconcilable, and maybe it's like the search for a unified theory. Maybe Einstein's problem. Maybe string theory will not unify the quanta and the macro. And in this I just wanted to. Sort of remind those of us who go to the regular Frote's gatherings that we did one on cosmology. What was the exact title? It was
Modern Cosmology.
Modern Cosmology. So we had here a bunch of cosmologists, and then we had a fellow from Harvard who was a kind of a historian of religion. Was he really?
Confucian Studies.
Confucian Studies.
Yes.
Yes, and the crux of it was, and I thought it was really interesting, that they were saying things like, well, we've concluded within 20% X% amount of doubt that the universe is 13.7 billion years old. But the thing that was coming out is that cosmology was an adolescent. The science of cosmology was an adolescent. And Professor, I can't pronounce it, Wayne was saying that we have 5,000 years of knowledge, and we have to discount these 5,000 years of other ways of thinking. And then it sort of reminded me again. Then the Husserl rule came up, and other descriptive thinking, different ways of perceiving the same things. Must it be integrative? I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but the two, there was no conclusion to our particular roundtable at the time. But and all the scientific evidence was the cosmologist said, the woman from who was the woman cosmologist? Deborah Fisher said these are facts. There's no doubt of any of these facts, and yet they were in complete contravention to how do we deal with the history of all this wisdom, which has an organic infrastructure all its own, which can't be discounted because it's old. It's not because it's old. It's almost like biology in and of itself. Can you discount all this learning that isn't not only superstition, but like in a Husserlian sense, you have to describe it. You can't judge it necessarily. I mean, this was the kind of discussions that I'm just sort of trumpeting our own horn here. But thank you very much.
This is John Forrester. I'm going to put this question back again. I can't remember what phrase you used, but you were talking about belief. And you said something like, not this, but something like, that all belief is an illusion from a psychological point of view. Do you remember what I'm talking about? And I'm just wondering what you meant. What you say more about what you meant?
The healthiest person would be someone who had the minimum of beliefs by which to get by.
So you're talking about moral beliefs, not how to live life?
No, it would be just generally. I mean, it would be kind of, you go on a psychoanalysis would be like slimming. You get rid of the excess of beliefs.
Is there a difference between unfounded beliefs? I mean, you can believe the facts of cosmology, and that's not what you mean.
No, I don't regard those as
those aren't beliefs.
Beliefs, they're dispositions to act on the basis of having read or heard people talk about things, but it doesn't. It may not matter very much. But the beliefs that count are the ones that lead to action. Whereas a lot
You're not talking about beliefs like fear is around and here to
that could lead to action. That could lead to action.
Pardon me?
That could lead to action.
That's why so it looks like those could be included. So we're to
Yes.
the healthy person and also not feeling distressful.
No. You would, but you because they're well founded. They're rational.
You're talking about ill-healthy beliefs in particular.
And the point is that most beliefs are ill-founded. That would be the starting point. We obviously fill up very easily with ill-founded beliefs. That's in one sense the neological expression that exists in religions. And they're very tenacious. So getting rid of those beliefs and I would cognate with them. And religion is exemplary in this respect because the obsessional thoughts that go with action are very, very tenacious in Freudian account. In the same way religion is very tenacious. You have the work of getting rid of those, and that's the work of therapy.
Have you told this to Richard Dawkins? I'm almost serious. I mean, why not? I mean, there's Richard Dawkins. This sounds like these are these sort of viruses in our heads that we need to find ways to uproot. And it seems to me you want to have a conversation.
That was my point. The evolutionary psychology doesn't have a therapy.
That's right. It has a diagnosis, but it doesn't have the intervention.
It doesn't have the intervention. Whereas psychoanalysis was invented in order to cure people's beliefs.
Or in ignorance of Tibetan Buddhism.
Sorry?
Or in ignorance of, or invented in ignorance of Tibetan Buddhism. If the statement was made that meditation is a technology, for example.
Which is also to overcome false beliefs, actually. The illusion. So there could be quite an interesting dialogue between. And there has been actually. There are psychotherapists who have been very interested in integrating meditation with. You must know about this.
Yeah, there's also the favor on the sociology of religions. Buddhism is an archetype in otherworldly religion.
These narratives are of a lot of complexity, but I was just picking up on the description of the meditator as relaxed and happier in measurements compared to other people, etc., seems to, in a certain way, fit that description of that the perfect person, the healthy person, or whatever you want to call it.
He's a monk.
Yeah, it's a monk, but of the Zen type, I'd say, where it's not a belief system, it's not an internal dialogue, and meditation as a technology is a repatterning in that statement by the Dalai Lama and by other people, is a repatterning of these habituations or these fictions that cause neurosis. You follow what I'm trying to say? I mean, I'm making you joke in a way, but it's almost like there's a sudden overlap here.
So psychoanalysis and transcendental meditation would be equivalent technologies, and they could be able to transpose out of their theoretical systems. I mean, you don't have to believe the guff about eternal cycles or whatever in Buddhism, and you don't have to believe the guff about infantile sexuality in psychoanalysis, but they might be technologies that could be transposed and moved around in a kind of Latourian.
In the 60s and 70s, there was arguments made by people in the United States about the ways in which meditation. There was more feeling that neither was complete on its own. It was another East-West kind of story of integration, because meditation taught you to hold steady for the illusions, but then there needed to be the analytic move to actually work through and come to some kind of a reconciliation. So it was felt that neither was complete, but that they very much were incomplete on their own, and something better could come out of the integration.
We have one gentleman that's been waiting a long time to ask a question, and then we'll close with a question or a comment of Ed Nersessian.
Neither a question nor a comment, because I'm sitting in a funny way.
Okay. That could mean a lot of things, Ed. Yes.
John, you were talking about religion for
Freud as to do with, I suppose, deconstructing false beliefs. And I think that Freud was certainly an enemy of certain developed establishment religions of Catholicism and Protestant ones. But I wonder if it's going a bit far to say, well, he was just opposed to religion as such, which meant all kinds of beliefs other than natural science. And the reason I say that is that I think he often saw religion as a kind of competitor to himself, to his own kind of big questions. The kinds of questions he was asking, those Delphic questions, he was asking. Religion had answers and he had certain answers. And I wonder whether, in fact, he just hypothesized religion and put it all together as though Eastern religions and various other kinds of religions were all of one hue. And the point I make about that is that I think actually Freud had a Stoic approach towards everything. That it could be seen that, in fact, even his ideas about natural science and his criticism of established religion had to do with a Stoic attitude, which is actually a broader form of a therapy of a way of looking at the world.
Well, you could link Stoicism with skepticism with a scientific attitude of the sort that Freud was an enthusiastic proponent of. But I think Freud was a straightforward defender of science as it had got, where it had got to. I mean, the Darwinian sciences, the physical sciences, transforming the world, the environment. These were unalloyed goods for Freud. You read the final pages of Future of Illusions, just a rigorous defense against all manner of criticisms of science, and exactly the idea that science might somehow be an illusion, the same sort of religion.
But it's precisely the fact that the future of the illusion is precisely a rhetorical argument against religion, established religion of a certain sort. I'm just saying, I think there's a broader perspective which can be looked at. I think if you look at it in context,
maybe, but I think Freud genuinely committed himself to the Kantian view that children had false beliefs. Religions was the childhood of mankind, and human beings came to adulthood and maturity, and that was enlightenment, and you got rid of religion. Simple.
Didn't work. On that note, we're going to have to close this evening's session, but let me remind you that tomorrow morning we're going to start again at 10:30. Akil Bilgrami will be moderating the round table, and let me just take 1 second to say to Francis Levy and to Ed Nersessian how much, in addition to the participants, we all appreciate the opportunity to be able to have these events, and as frequently as we do here. It's thanks to you that these exist.